A jury has handed down a not guilty verdict in the case of Umar Zameer. He was accused of fatally running over Toronto police officer Jeffrey Northrup. The CBC's Greg Ross is at the courthouse. He joins me now with more. Greg, take us through that moment when this not guilty verdict came down.
Asha, it's an incredibly emotional moment in the courtroom. The judge read that not guilty verdict. I mean, you could hear audibly Umar Zameer begin to sob even before she finished reading that verdict. It seemed like it got quiet in the courtroom for several seconds, and all you could hear was Umar Zameer weeping. Obviously, tears of relief, tears of joy after learning that he was a free man. In fact, the judge said to him, "Mr. Zameer, you are free to leave," and at one point also apologizing him for what he's been through over these last 3 years. Here's what Umar Zameer said when he did leave the court with his lawyers.
I never meant any of this to happen. I am sorry for what had happened, but I never meant any of this to happen to this day. I can't thank enough to Mr. Nader, Mr. Alex. I can just say this, these are not just the lawyers, these are angels for me. They worked not just for this case, they worked for the truth. When Nader first came to me, when I was in the detention center and I asked him, how would you pursue, how would you go with my case? He said, I know it's very complex, but I know I'm dealing with the truth and I won't leave you by your side.
So obviously a very emotional day for Zameer, but also a very emotional day for the other side in this case. In fact, the wife of Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup, Margaret Northrup, who had been here quite a few of the days of this trial to listen to the testimony. In fact, at times having to listen to very graphic testimony about the death of her husband. And at times she was in the court seen crying. Well, today afterwards, she also came out with the chief of police and she made a statement. Here's what she had to say.
I am very disappointed in today's outcome. From day one, all I've wanted is accountability. We miss Jeff every day. However, we continue on with him in our hearts, never to be forgotten. A hero in life, not death.
Now, I can tell you that the lead Crown attorney in this case, Michael Cantlin, did not speak to the media afterwards, but he did come out just moments ago and handed us all this statement. I'll just really quickly read from this. He says the events surrounding the tragic death warranted a trial to determine accountability. We want to thank the jury for their dedication, attention, and hard work over these last 5 weeks. We have great faith and respect for the justice system. So that is the statement from the lead Crown attorney in this case, Asha.
And as we know, this incident happened back in 2021, right? For those who are not familiar with this case, take us through the details.
Well, it's interesting. We learned, I mean, just think about the fact that we had heard 3 years ago that a police officer had been killed in the line of duty, and we didn't hear many other details. But throughout the last 5 weeks of this trial, we finally got to learn the details of what happened that night. And we learned that Umar Zameer came to downtown Toronto with his wife, Ida Sheikh, and their then 2-year-old son. His wife was 8 months pregnant at the time, and they came here on July 1st to celebrate Canada Day. And they were here quite late in the evening, and it was just after midnight on July 2nd that they had gone back to their car. But on their way back down, they had seen actually a stabbing victim, somebody who had just been stabbed and was bleeding from his abdomen. And at the time, Zameer said he thought it was a little sketchy is the word he used, and he said they wanted to leave. They went down to their car, which was parked in the underground parking garage underneath Toronto's City Hall. And not long after getting into their car, Zameer says he was approached by a man and a woman. We later learned that was Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup with his partner Lisa Forbes. They were both in plain clothes. Neither of them were in uniform. Now, we know that at least Lisa Forbes had her badge visible, but Zameer says he didn't see the badge. And when the the couple approached them, he said they began banging on his car, demanding that he roll down his window, demanding that he get out of his car. He tried to drive away from the scene. He was then blocked in by two other plainclothes police officers who were in an unmarked police van with tinted windows. He said he felt like there was a gang that were trying to rob him, and he then tried to reverse away from the scene. And accident reconstruction specialists throughout the trial, two different accident reconstruction specialists, one for the Crown, one for the defense, both testified that it appears that while Zameer was reversing out of the spot, his car sideswiped Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup, knocking him to the ground. And then it appears that he had fallen into the front of Zameer's path as he then tried to drive forward. And at least one of the accident reconstruction specialists said that the blind spot that would have been created by the hood of his car made it impossible for him to see Northrup on the ground in front of his car. And unfortunately, that is when he ran over Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup. So obviously a very difficult case. Zameer says he didn't see him there. He didn't know that he had run over an officer. There was testimony from some of the other officers that were there that night that said he said as much on that night, immediately after it happened. Him and his wife both said that they didn't know that these plainclothes officers were police, and also saying that they did not know that they had hit Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup with their car.
Thank you so much. CBC's Greg Ross from Toronto, right at the courthouse where this verdict was handed down. For more, we're joined by Lydia Riva in Whitby, Ontario. She is a criminal lawyer. What is your reaction to this verdict?
I was in the courtroom when Umar Zameer testified. I watched this case very closely. I watched the closing arguments of the defense and the Crown. And in my opinion, this was the right and just verdict. Watching this case, watching the evidence, hearing the Crown's opening and closing submission, in my view, this was an innocent person who was in the context of chaos, confusion, and fear and acted accordingly. So I think this was the right verdict, and the jury came to the just verdict.
Zameer could have been convicted, as we know, of first-degree murder or of manslaughter, even second-degree murder, or acquitted entirely, the latter of which is what happened. As the judge said, you're a free man, you can walk away. What is the burden of proof, though, needed for each of these?
The burden of proof is the same for any criminal offense. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So the Crown would have had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Zameer had meant to cause the death of the officer, or that he meant to cause bodily harm that he knew would likely cause death and be reckless about it, and believe that he was a police officer to convict him of first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. And for second-degree murder, they would have had to have proven that he had this state of mind for murder, but that he didn't know he was a police officer. For manslaughter, the Crown would have had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the crime of dangerous driving, because this was unlawful act manslaughter that was alleged. And then they would have had to find that he had the fault element for manslaughter. So the jury has found that the Crown has not proven any of those elements of any of those offenses. And the judge said to Mr. Zameer, at the end, you're free to go.
Yeah, at times in the trial, let's talk about the judge, Judge Malloy, questioning the Crown and what it was arguing. I mean, is that surprising to you?
It's surprising only not in the context of this case. This, for a first-degree murder case, for the judge to be critical not only of the charge, but of the Crown's theory. The judge had even criticized the Crown for not sticking to a theory. And part of the problem was that the Crown's own main witnesses, in particular the three police officers who were at the scene, their evidence was contradicted by the Crown's accident reconstructionist, their own expert witness. So in that sense, it was a very unusual case, but she did criticize the prosecution, and in the end, the jury came to their own conclusion based on their review of the evidence and on the law that was provided to them during the judge's charge.
I know this is, a case-by-case basis, but what will come out of this, if anything?
You wonder whether or not there's going to be some analysis or scrutiny around how plainclothes officers approach persons who are not doing anything wrong. Both the Crown and the defense in this case conceded that Mr. Zameer was unlawfully detained, that the police did not have legal grounds to stop him or to stop his motor vehicle. So one would hope there would be some review of how this situation came about. When Mr. Zameer testified, he really described a nightmare, and certainly not only on that day when this tragic accident happened and this tragedy happened for Officer Northrup's family, but also going through the criminal justice system. It's obviously very stressful, difficult thing for him to go through. So one would hope that there'd be some type of review or accountability for the situation that this innocent man found himself in.
And, you know, the defense lawyer was asked this by the media. I want to ask you and put it to you, given all of this, could Zameer seek damages from the Crown for this prosecution?
I'm not a civil lawyer, so I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I focus on that. And I believe his lawyer said that that's something that they will have to consider. It might be that Mr. Zameer just wants to put this past him, but I'm sure he will be reviewing his options, and it could be a possibility. I mean, as we said, the judge was critical of the charge. The jury has acquitted him of all offenses before the court. So we don't know yet whether that's going to happen, but I'm sure he's going to be considering it with his lawyers.
Before I let you go, you know, you've been following this case closely and the trial. What stood out for you, given your expertise?
Several things stood out from this case. I think one thing, and you know this as a defense lawyer, but it's really important not to prejudge cases, and we really saw a different narrative right from the beginning with the defense lawyer's opening to what we had thought this case might be about. But also what was very unusual about this case is the fact that the Crown had differing theories of liability, but also, as Justice Malloy said in her instructions to the jury, this was a rare case where both the Crown's accident reconstructionist and the defense accident reconstructionist were in complete agreement. So that also stands out in my mind. But there's many other things about this case that make it unusual.
Lydia, good to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Criminal lawyer Lydia Riva. We are back in just a moment.